to start recording. Okay, perfect. All right, welcome to the third week of lecture. The topics for this lecture are models and migrations, which is basically how to store information on your Rails web application. First off, I just want to get a quick show of hands. How many people have started homework 2? Okay, that's actually a good number of you, a surprising number. How many people have finished? Okay. All right, for those who have finished, did it take you less than an hour to do? Okay, I see no hands, so that's a good sign. I didn't want to make it too easy. Did it take about 1 to 3? Okay, that's about half of you that raised your hand earlier. So that's probably what I was trying to aim for. How about 3 to 5? Okay, no hands. So I'm just gonna assume it just in general took between 1 to 3 hours. So for the people that have not started, that's probably about how long it'll take. I'm just surprised because usually at this point I would get a lot of Piazza questions, but not much has been happening. So maybe that'll change right before the deadline, but Okay, so today the topics we're going to cover are an introduction to databases, what models are in a Rails application, how do we create these models, what migrations are, which are, as a quick overview, it's just a change to a database, and how to query your database or grab the information from your database so your Rails application can use it. Okay, so basically, a database is a way to persist data. What that means is you use a database just to store information and keep information there. A database consists of many tables, which are like singular collections of information. Each table has rows and columns. Each column corresponds to an attribute, and each row corresponds to an entry. So if you could just think of a database as a collection of Excel sheets or like CSVs, and that each table is like a single file or CSV. In that your CSV file, you have columns that tell you like certain pieces of information. For example, let's say you have a CSV file about your users, right? It would have columns like, oh, the user's name, their email, and some other information about them. And each consecutive row after contains the particular information about a particular user. If you want more information about databases or how they work, you should take a CS 186. You get a whole course about how a database works and like ways it could retrieve information faster. Do we have any questions so far? All right, so there are multiple databases that people use. Some people use Postgres, which I want to say, like the predecessor to Postgres, I want to say came out of Berkeley, and so did I want to say Postgres itself came out of Berkeley. It's run by an open source community. Another really common one that's used in the industry is MySQL, and another common one is MongoDB. These are just different types of databases. For the sake of this class, you actually don't need to worry about it because for the most part, we're going to be using SQLite. And what SQLite does is it just stores all your data in a text file. And when we go into creating our web applications and our databases, you will be able to look at that text file. That being said, when you kind of open in a text editor, it's just a bunch of gibberish. But we'll show you how to look up information in this database. So going back to our MVC model, is this hard to see because of the light, or is it fine? Okay, it's okay, good. Well, even if there was a problem, I wouldn't know what to do to fix it. So anyways, so going back, in our MVC model, our client, we start with the client, right? We go, and our client is our browser. We make a request That request goes to our dispatcher. If you remember from last week, our dispatcher is our routes.rv file. It takes in a request, parses through the request, and figures out which function or controller and action to call. So from client goes to 1, which is a request. The dispatcher reads the request, and it goes to 2, which sends the request and its parameters to the controller, and the controller will figure out what actions to do. Last week, we did not do steps 3 and 4 to go to the model because we were just working with static pages. We didn't use any information from the database. So before, we would just skip all the way to 5, go to the view, use the view to create an HTML file, and we would send it back to the browser in step 6. But today, we're going to learn how to, or at least the basics of what happens in step 3 and 4, where we go access a model, use that model to access our database, either store information there or retrieve information, and send it back to the controller. Yeah, so it's circled because that's what today is. So what are models? Models are a built-in class within the Ruby on Rails framework. What it provides for you are methods that you do not need to define. It will interact with your database for you, which means that it will help you retrieve the information and then present the information in a very accessible way. And do other things like form relationships between 2 different tables and validate that your data is valid. And to get all this, we need to find a Ruby class, right? All you have to do is inherit from something called active record : base, and this will provide you all the functionality of a model. Okay. So why are they important? They are pretty much at the core of your Rails application because without the ability to access your data, your Rails application probably can't do much other than route to static pages. And we'll spend future lectures on other functionalities of models, such as validations, relationships between models, and abilities. Do we have any questions before I start showing some code or how to generate a model? Well, before I continue, does anybody, are people confused about what's the difference between the model and the database right now? Can anybody explain it to me? Okay, I assume, yes.
I'll try. The model would be like a class-based presentation, like an API to access the database.
Yes, and what is the database itself?
It's the database application that actually stores data using relational.
Yes, that's exactly it. Just to reiterate what he just said, what the active model in Ruby on Rails is more of an API that you use to access information from a database. The database itself is where the actual information is stored. So if you want, let's think about it like this. Let's say we have a Python interpreter, right? When we open a Python interpreter, we say x equals 5, right? And then while we're in that Python session, as long as we keep on typing x, we'll keep on receiving 5. But once I turn off my Python interpreter and reopen it, if I try to access x again, it's not there, right? Because that information was within the Python memory, but it was never stored anywhere. What a model, what a database is more like a file that you actually write to your computer. So that let's say you use Python, right? And you write a script to write to a file. Once you close your Python script, your file still exists. That information is still stored. The database is like the information that's still stored. You could additionally write Python scripts to re-access the information in that database that you just wrote to. And that's what the models are more like. It's Ruby code that goes into your database, retrieves that information, and puts it into an instance of a class. And what that allows you to do is that let's say you write a Ruby on Rails application, right? You make a business, for example, you have a bunch of customer information, right? And you store it all in this database. And let's say later you realize maybe Ruby on Rails is not what I want to write it, or you want to write a new feature not in Ruby. Like let's say you choose to use some other framework to do another part of the application. What you can do is just write that other part and have it access the same database so that it has access to all this information, because Ruby on Rails itself does not store it. Rather, it just is a way for you to grab and update this table. Okay. Questions? Well, since you aren't asking questions, I'll proceed, but hopefully, as I go along, it will make more sense. So basically, I'm going to start our live coding here, but to create a model, you could always go into your application folder, go to your models folder, and manually write out a file that inherits from Active Record Base. But if you remember from last week, we have something called Rails generators, right? That when you could just use your command line, type in some information, and Rails will generate the file for you. The command Rails generate, to create a model, you just have to type Rails generate, put in the string model, and then after that, you put in the name of your model. And you have options after that to put in columns onto your model. Or more accurately, you put columns on a table that your model will access. And I'll show you how we do this. I want to reattach this to, is this good? I see a thumb. I don't see any negative thumbs. I mean, thumbs down, but yeah, okay. So, well, for this lecture, I'm just going to start a new Rails application. Does anyone remember how to do that? Anyone? I think I hear people mumbling it. I might be imagining things, but if you don't remember, it's Rails new and the name of your application. So I'm going to call this application lecture 3. It'll generate a bunch of files for me that are important for my Rails application. It'll run bundle install, which will install my dependencies. And now I have a folder called lecture 3, which is a Rails application. CD lecture 3. And it has all these folders. And I'm just going to open up my text editor so we can look at it. I'm going to close out my iTunes because it's jumping around. OK. So from last week, we talked about where we could find our MVC, which is in our app folder. And to find models will be under our models folder. So it's this folder that's opening up right here. So right now, in a new Rails application, I have nothing in my models folder. To generate a model, all I have to do is run Rails generate, but locally, I've shortcutted G to generate. So if you see me use G, what it stands for is generate. So Rails G model. So I'm going to generate a model. And for this lecture, I want to store information about dogs. Okay, so the name of my model is dog. Right? Now I have to think about information I want to associate with my dog. Let's say my dog has a name, right? And a name would be what data type, if anyone could guess? String, exactly. So I'm gonna put name colon string space, and I'm gonna put another attribute. Let's say I wanna know how old my dog is. I'm gonna call that column age. What type should age be? I heard int, so I'm just gonna put integer. I'm gonna run this command line command, right? And what Rails did was it created this file. There are two important files for us to look at. One is db/migrate, some date timestamp, create dogs RB, and app/model/dog.rb. Okay, so if we go look in our application folder in our models, now we have dog.rb, which is, as I said earlier, a Rails class that inherits from active record base. And there is another file that if you look at the generation, it says db/migrate/datetime create dogs.rb, which is this thing. Does anyone know what a migration is? And it's okay if you don't, because I didn't cover that yet. But it's something that's auto-generated when I run Rails gmodel. Okay. So a migration is a change to a database. So as I said earlier, we have a Rails application, right? It has models, views, controllers. We write code to interact with the database, but the Rails application is not the database itself. What a migration file is a script that tells the database to change. So right now, you never saw me instantiate create a database. You never saw me create a table, right? And just for the sake of showing you guys, if you remember from last week, we have the command Rails console, which runs our Rails application locally without our views. So if I run Rails console, it's just like in our Ruby terminal or Ruby interpreter. And when I run Rails console, what it does is it goes through all my app/models folders. So right now I have access to a dog class because I defined, okay, that doesn't affect that. Because I defined a dog model, right? When I call dog.new, I get an error. And the reason I get this error is due to the fact that I have a dog model, and what it's trying to do right now is go into my database and retrieve information about dogs. But my database currently doesn't exist yet. So what the migration file that was created along with my generator does is it tells my Rails application to create a database for me in the table. Create the database for me, create a table. So on the first line you see it has a command called create table dogs. What it's saying is inside my database, we'll insert a table called dogs, give it a string called name and an integer called age. And this timestamp stuff is auto-generated and we can inspect it later. But for now, just know that we've created a model file and we've created a migration file, which I've said was a change to the database. So how do I run this change or run this migration? I'll just skip to this one and go back to the other slide. To actually make the change on your database, you have to run a command called rake db:\migrate. So I'm going to exit out my console, and I'm going to run that command, rake db:\migrate, and just let it run. When I run this command, it'll give me output that says it created a table called dogs. It took however long, but that's not important. And let's say I run it again. Nothing happens. And it's because I've already made this change to my database. If I already have a dog table, there's no need for me to recreate another dog table. So now if I go to my console, Rails console again, when I do dog.new, it doesn't error out. I just have an empty dog. What are your questions so far? Yes.
Is this dog already in the database?
No, this dog is not already in the database. So right now, after running this migration, I've created a change to my database. And my database is here, and currently all it has is a single dog table, and it is completely empty. when I do dog.new, I create an instance of a dog in Ruby memory. So let's say I have a database to my right. My Ruby application is on the left. When I do d equals dog.new, it's on my Ruby side that assigned to a variable d is an empty dog right now. This dog does not have an ID. So basically on the output, you can see that I have information about the dog. It has no ID, no name, no age, created at, and updated at. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the fields here. So if you remember name, right, we actually specified this dog to have a name. And we also specified this dog to have an age. But we never once in our code wrote like ID, created at, or updated at. These are created by t. So the created at and the updated at is created by t.timestamp, which is always auto-generated by Rails for your models because they believe it's a very useful thing, just to know when you first inserted something into your database and when you last updated it. And ID is, Rails will always just shove in an ID, which is a unique identifier for a row in your table. So a useful command that is on one of the slides to see every row in the table is a method called .all. So if I do dog.all, right, I have this active record class called dog. And when I run .all, it'll give me every row of dog back. So dog.all. If any of you have taken like CS 186 or know about queries, this is a SQL string. So what Rails will do is translate your method calls into a string, and your database is able to read that string and like fetch results. So when you call dog.all, just say select from the dog table all the attributes, or select all the dog attributes from the table dog. You will never need to really understand these SQL strings for the purpose of this class. And the purpose of Rails is so that you don't need to really understand them. You just know how to get information, update information, retrieve, and delete information. But going back to this, right now I have an empty dog table. This is boring. What I want to do is populate this dog table. So if you remember, I have stored in my variable d an empty dog. It's in my Ruby memory, but it's not in my database. So right now I'm going to do, to access attributes of the a Ruby model, I could just do dot. So since I could see the dog that has an ID, I could do d.id. Since it's nil, it gives me back nil. So therefore, if I do it on any of the attributes, since I could see that they're all nil, I should always get back nil. To update information about this, I could just say d.name is Fido. So when I access D again, you could see that right here, the name Fido has been updated. And let's give the dog an age. Dog age equals 2. This dog is 2 years old. So I have this dog. I updated this information. It now stores the name Fido and age on this active record model instance. And if you remember correctly, dog.all gives me back all the dogs in my database. Can anyone just at least throw out a guess of what happens when I call dog.all? I heard empty, and that is correct. Why is it empty? Exactly. I have not moved this dog to the database. So I have this dog model, or an instance of a dog model, in my Ruby memory. The database has not written to it yet. So a way to get your dog from Ruby memory into your database is D, or wherever your dog is saved, right? So I saved my dog as D, and call save on it, .save. And then bam. What it does, it begins a query string that says insert this into the database. When you call .save, information that you'll find useful later, but not in the immediate week, is that it returns a true or false value. True means it properly got into the database and saved. It returns false if it failed to get into the database. And the reason why that will occur is something that will be touched upon in later lectures about validations. So right now, if I call dog.all, I could see that I get a list with a single dog, right? In it, I have a dog that's named Fido. Its age is 2. And here's some important information. When you finally save an instance of a model into your database, you'll automatically assign it an ID. So since this is the first dog in my database, I gave it the ID 1. And other attributes that automatically get updated when you save are created at and updated at. So created at only saves on the first time, right? And updated at saves every time you change a value. So let's look at our dog again, Fido. A way to access things in your database are called queries. Queries basically are you just asking your database for a piece of information. And the basic one we're going to learn right now is something called find. So right now in D, I have my dog Fido. I'm going to set D to nil, right? So now I have no access to Fido, right? I can access Fido if I do dog.all and grab like the 0th element, right? But there are easier ways to access it. One is a method called .find. What .find does is you pass it in an integer, right? And we'll find the associated row that has that ID. So since I know my dog Fido has ID 1, when I call dog.find, it will return me back this dog named Fido at age 2. So D equals dog, that's one way to do it. A very convenient method that people use a lot is first. So on the same dog class, if you call .first, it'll just return you the first model in the database, or the first row. So you get Fido back. So I'm just going to do D equals dog.first, which is the same thing, and now have this dog. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to create a new dog. So the first way I created a dog was I'm going to assign this dog to variable E, right? And I had a dog model, the dog class. And the first way I did it was I called .new. I had an empty dog, and I did e.name equals hi. Let's just put it as hi right now, right? And then that gets updated to this instance of a dog. But a way you could do it in one line is I'm going to first set e to null. So you know I'm starting from, oh, whoops. Let's see. E equals nil. So now e is at nothing, right? An easy way to update attributes or set attributes at the beginning is that .new takes in an options hash. And if you remember from the previous week, it means that I could pass it in a bunch of key value pairs. And these key value pairs will be the attributes. So let's say I want to name my dog Ethan, right? And it's going to be age 3. So I'm going to call dog.new. I could pass in the key name and say this name is Ethan, right? And I could pass in a key age and say it is 3. And you see here, the output is now a dog with the name Ethan and the age 3. So instead of it doing line by line, like dog.new equals whatever, dog.name equals this, dog.age equals this, you could just pass in an options hash to new, and you get that. And just to make sure that, just as a reminder, this is the same thing as having parentheses at both ends and creating this hash map of values. That's the exact same thing. So just a little experiment. I now have this dog, Ethan, and I saved the dog, Fido, from earlier. I exit my Ruby console and run Rails console again. I call dog.all, but dog should appear. Yeah, so he said only the first dog will appear. So run dog.all, I only get back dog with ID 1. And an easy way to count arrays is they have a method called .count. That just gave me back the length of the array, which is 1. Why did I not get Ethan? Exactly, I never saved it. So I'm gonna recreate Ethan, which is e equals dog.new. Create a new instance of a dog. I know his name is Ethan. And I put a comma, his age is 3. E.save. And now when I do dog.all, you see first we got the dog named Fido and the dog named Ethan as the second one. And another thing we can check is the count, which is dog.all.count, which will give us back the number of dogs we have, which is 2. So let's say, do I still have E? Yeah, okay, let's say I have E equals nil. So right now I have nothing pointing to the dog Ethan. How do I find Ethan? Exactly. You could from early in the lecture, I was talking about you could query or get a single row back from the database. And the method to do that is find. So right now E is nil, but I want to assign E back to Ethan. I just put E equals dog dot find. What do I have to pass in to find? The ID. So since I know Ethan is of ID 2, let's just do dog.find2. And right now it's assigned to the dog Ethan. Yeah. Yes. Yes, you can search for other attributes. So here is how. So we have dog, right? And just to make this, just to show this point, or maybe not to show this point, but or yes. A thing that you should note now, this is a little, it's like half off topic of the question that was just asked, but my dog models is empty. I never defined a single method in my dog model. So all this, so in the dog class, .new, .find, .all, .first, all of that is inherited from active record base. So that's where all the methods are from. And if you remember my instance of a dog, right? Like I have E, for example, right? Which is Ethan. Ethan has has a method called .name, which gets me the name, and .age, E.id, but I've never defined any of those. How Rails does this is whenever Rails makes a query to a certain table, right? It'll look at the columns of the table and define the attributes on here. So then if there exists, if I try to access an attribute that doesn't exist on the docs table, like I've never made a column that is FDA, JSKL, whatever, that'll error out because it cannot find it. Okay, and the question was, okay, searching for other attributes. So Rails is really smart, and Rails knows the attributes on the dog table. So what it does is it defines it defines extra methods to search on other attributes. Since it knows dog has a name, it has a method called find by name. So what Rails does is it takes the name of the column and it will define a method that's called find by underscore name of the column. So I'm gonna dog find by name, Ethan. And what will return me is a single dog that has the name Ethan. And if there's no dog named Ethan, So when I do that, it returns me a nil. I have another dog, if you remember, called Fido. So if I do find by name Fido, it gives me that single dog back. Yes.
So like this is there like a way to have that instead? Like, know what it's supposed to
Let's see. I want to say you could run on the class dot execute. There's okay, definitely there is a way, for sure. I just don't remember it off the top of my head. But I want to say it's. I'm just gonna check if this is a method. No, it's not. There is definitely a way to do that. I just don't remember it off the top of my head. But I could get back at the beginning of next lecture and say what that method was. But it's an easy, if you Google search it, you'll probably find it faster than a week later. So yeah. And if you ever are curious about what SQL string that Rails is going to execute, you could actually, I believe, if you do like dog find by one and you run the method to SQL, nope. That is not what I wanted. Wait, let's see. Dog.all. Oh. Okay, yes. So if you remember, my dog.all queries for everything, right? If you run a method called like .to_SQL, you could just get the query string back. So things people do is actually use Rails to build query strings, but instead of like loading all the information into an instance of an active model, let's say you have like this is an example that for the most part of this class you don't have to understand, but let's say if you're building like a JSON API, you don't need like all these extra methods and you just want the minimal amount of information, that you could just use Rails to generate your query string, fire the query string yourself, and just pass that string in JSON format through an API. If you don't understand that, that's okay, because you don't need that for this class. Yeah.
You can use where as the pass into the SQL. Like if you know what you want to search for, you can use where. You can move that up on the API.
Yeah. Also, there's another use of where too that I was going to get to. So let's say I have 3 dogs in my database, right? I say d equals dog.new and d.name equals Ethan, d.save. So if I do dog.all, or if you don't need to do .all.count. The dog class will recognize count and it'll just tell me there are 3 dogs in the database. If I look at them, I can see I have 1 dog named Fido, another dog named Ethan, and a 3rd dog named Ethan. What find by attribute, this is a small detail that you might not ever run into in the purpose of this class, but in your own, like, so your final project is a free project. So you might run into this is if you run find by attribute, right? Let's say find by name, Ethan, for example. I didn't spell Ethan right. Right? Only get back a single dog. And the reason is when you run the command find by, it will just so there are multiple dogs that match Ethan, right? When you use a find by command, it will always return the first one. So now you're probably curious, what if I want to see all the dogs named Ethan? Where is very versatile, that if you run the command where takes in an options hash. And let's pass in the hash Ethan. I'll get an array instead of all the dogs that have the name Ethan. And in case you don't remember this, I know I say this about 1 billion times, but I found it very confusing at first to like know the weird syntax, but this is what it is when you put all the parentheses and all the curly brackets. And if you can see that right here, that I have 1 dog, Ethan, that is age 3, and the other one age 0. So if I pass in another option, like its age and say, ask for a dog where its name is Ethan and its age is 3, I'll only get back one of them because the other one is nil. What are your questions? Yeah. Where is the actual file for the database? So depending on what database you use, there might not be a file in your Rails repo, but so Rails defaults to something called SQLite. I'm not going to show the file because it might be a little too much information, but for that specific question, if you're using SQLite, which any new Rails application defaults to, if you pop open DB, and inside DB, you'll have a development.sqlite.3. If you open it, this is all your database information in a text format. So they write in a format that the database could read, right? So a bunch of this is gibberish and characters that my text editor cannot understand, but you could see little pieces of information that actually belong to my database. For example, I found like a little bit of Ethan right there on line 7, but yeah, that is where it's stored. So if I were to delete this file, my database would be empty, but yes. Okay. Just quick piece of information. To get methods on your models, all you have to do that aren't like your attributes, you could just define them. So let's say I define bark, right? And what I will do is return the string of bark, hi, my name is. If you remember, if I put a hashtag and curly brackets, I do something called string interpolation, where I will evaluate the Ruby code between these 2 brackets and put it in the string. So, hi, my name is name. If I run, so I'm going to reload this, right? There's 2 ways to reload Rails application. You can either call reload ! Or you can exit out, which is probably the safest way, but I'm going to show you. So to get a single dog back, I'm going to get, or let's say I want to get my first dog back. I could just do dog.first and assign it to D. So now I'm my first dog, right? And I find a method called bark. So when I do d.bark, it says bark, hi, my name is Fido. And the reason why I have access to its name is that within your own functions, you will have access to its attributes. So if I have name, it'll give me the name. If I have age and I reload and d equals dog.first, then if I do d.bark, hi, my name is 2. But instead of putting its name, I told it to evaluate the evaluation of age. Okay. What are your questions? Can't tell. Okay. I guess, yes. How do I what? Delete, like remove the table? Remove an entry. Okay, yes. So basically, I have an instance of my dog, right? That's stored as in the variable D, right? I could just do d.delete and it'll delete my dog. So if you remember, D was my first dog, right? So I deleted Fido. So when I do dog.all, Fido is gone. I just have my 2 Ethans. They delete the dog. Okay. Let's say I'm rolling around. I'm not happy with my dogs. For example, let's say my dog does not have enough information for me to be satisfied. Let's say I want my dogs to hold more information. Let's say I'm really into dogs and I think my dog deserves an email account. How do I do that? the thing is, where do you, let's see, how do I phrase this question? I'm not even sure if I should do this as a question, but I'll just say it. How about that? So basically, if we remember, this dog model reads from our database, right? It doesn't actually store the information. What actually stores the information is our database. And right now, our database, when we created a dog table, right? We created a column called name and a column called age. One's a string, one's an integer, and some timestamps. So to add additional information storage, what we have to do is create another migration. And when I say migration, I mean like a change to a database. How do I do that? The thing is, if you remember, when I ran Rails G model, right, I generated both a model and its table and its columns. But I only, at this point, I want to keep my dog model. I want to keep this email associated with my dog without creating a new model. So the way I do that is run Rails G for generate. This translates to generate, but I have it shortcut as G. So I have Rails G migration. So that means I'm saying, okay, I'm not creating a whole new model. I'm just saying I'm going to make a change to my database. So I run Rails G migration, and I have to give my migration a name. So I'm going to say add email to dogs. That's going to be the name of my file. And I pass it in email. And what type should email be? String, yeah. I mean, I half wrote it out, but here we go. So right here, we can see that we create another migration file, date stamp, add email to dogs. Now let's open it. I go to my DB folder, go to my migrate folder, and since the timestamps are at the beginning, all my migrations are in order. I open this, and look at what Rails generated for me. A migration, and within its change is add column, dogs, comma, email, comma, string. So there's a bunch of methods that you can access when your class inherits from active record migration. And one of them is add column. What add column does is it first takes in a table, comma, name of your column, comma, the column type. An important thing I want to note is the name of the table. The name of the table is dogs. Even though my model is singular, right? My class is singular, the name of the table that's automatically generated is going to be pluralized. This is simply out of convention. And for those who know databases, and for those who are just curious, how does dog know to look up in the dogs table? It actually makes an inference based off the class name. It could this class in Ruby classes know their own name. So when it accesses its own name, it can see the string capital D O G. And what Rails does, it assumes it has an associated table that is the word underscored and pluralized. And just to show you how Rails has that functionality, it's I'll just pop over the Rails console. And let's say I have the string dog, right? All strings have methods on them. I believe it's downcase. You get the lowercase, right? And another method on strings is, I believe, pluralize. So now you transform dog to dogs. And I want to say it's kind of impressive if I put octopus, pluralize, please do something cool. It knows to do octopi. I want to say it doesn't work on deer, but I'm going to check. Pluralize. Okay, yeah, it puts deers, but it works for the most part. Second, another point I want to make is, so in my Rails generate command, and I'm just going to press up to show you what the generate command is. It's Rails G migration, and what I passed in was email : string, right? So it knew I wanted an email column. It knew that column is a string. How did it know to do dogs? I didn't know to add it to the dogs table. Anyone want to take a guess? Yeah. Exactly. So basically, Rails likes to make a lot of inferences based off the names of your class. So the reason why I named this class add emails to dogs is add emails is just important information just for me to look later that I know what I did in this migration. But when the generator goes through the name of your file, what we'll do is it'll try to find the word to. It finds to, and it grabs the continuing words past it and assumes that's going to be the name of your table. You don't always have to rely on a generator. You could always manually make these files, well, you could always make these files yourself. But the generators are just useful, and if you forget, there's always just documentation readily available online. And for the sake of your homework, that like it's linked within the README of your homework, so it's easy to access. And let's say I made this generator, right? But I said, oh, I forgot to do another change in my generator, right? I have two options. I could delete this file and regenerate the file with what I want, or if I ever want to manually do something, I could actually manually just change the file. Let's say I want to rename a column, right? And I know the column is on the dogs table. For the sake of this example, it's my only table. I rename a column on dogs. A column on dogs, for example, is name. Let's say this is just an online platform for having an account where you pretend to be a dog. So your dog's name isn't your actual dog's name. It's actually a user name. So rename column, what it does, first argument, table, second argument, name of column, third argument, but you want to rename it too. So I create this migration, and now I run Rails console or Rails C. I do dog d equals dog.new. Oh wait, what's this? It seems like my name's still name, and I don't have my email field. And if I do dog d equals dog.first, and I just do like d.email, I get an error. Why is that? Exactly. So if you remember earlier, migration files are like scripts that tell how a database should change. To actually run the changes, you have to run the command rake db migrate. So exit here, and I'm in my command line. I just run rake db migrate, and voila. What it does is it goes basically your database. What Rails configures is it stores like the last migration that's ran somewhere in a table that you'll never really have to access. It'll look in that table and say, okay, this is last migration that's ran. Are there any new ones, right? It found my new one that was like add email to dogs, and it went through the code and said, okay, add this column, email, that's a string, and rename my name column to username. So in my Rails console, I do d equals dog.new. Now the name is a username, and it's email. It has an email field now, so I could just do d.email equals hi@by.com, and d.save, save the dog. And now another useful method that Rails puts on that's not first is last. So if I run dog.last, it'll give me the last dog I inserted, and you can see that it has an email stored on it. So this is right. Creating migrations is how you can actually make changes to your database. What are your questions? Yeah.
So you said automatically detected if there was a migration.
Yeah. So
What if we had model?
so the thing is, it's on the slides that I skipped over, but right here, never change migrated migrations. And what that means is once you run rake db migrate, don't touch that file anymore, because how do I explain this? So basically, your net database, right? Your final form of your database is a collection of like adding columns, adding tables, minusing tables, right? Sequentially, that you just run in order. If you already ran the migration, right, and you say, wait, I don't like this column anymore. Let's say like I take out this emails one, right? Add column emails. As you remember, just changing this file won't actually change anything about the model. My dog will still have an email regardless. And if I run rake db migrate, nothing happens because I didn't create any new migrations. So if what I said is true, if I do d equals dog.new, it still has an email right here. So editing the file is pretty much useless. The bad part about it is that if you were to drop your database, right, and rerun all the migrations, like rake db migrate, your new final database is inconsistent with your old one. And this is a problem when you start working with people. So once you run rake db migrate, don't touch those files anymore. If you want to remove a column, you want to create a new migration. So let's say I want to remove the email column. I could just go rake Rails G for generate migration, remove email from dogs. And in my newest migration file, I could just do remove column. This is me manually doing it. So the name of my table is the name of the model pluralized. And the name of the column is email. I could run rake db migrate. And it did the migration. If I run Rails console, I get this, get my first dog, or I just create an empty dog. And it no longer has the email column. Do we have any more questions about that? Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
So the migration file is only for the structure of the table, but not data.
Yeah, it only is for the structure of tables. It's basically how, yes, it's basically what tables exist and what columns are there. It doesn't have anything to do with the rows. But for example, if you delete a column off a table, the rows will no longer have that particular piece of information. And if you delete a whole table, that's just gone forever. Yes. Yes, you can do a new migration, and so you can do this when you're developing an application, but it's a lot harder to do when you have a real application running. But just for the sake of this, you can run the command rake db rollback. Okay, why did not that work? Why did that not work? Okay. Where does occurred? Remove column. Oh, okay. So normally when you're supposed to remove column, you're supposed to tell it a type. I'm just going to manually do it for the sake of. Normally when you write remove column, you don't have to specify a type, right? It's an option because it doesn't, like when removing it itself, it doesn't need to know like what type it is. You know it wants to get rid of it. When you run the command rake db rollback, it'll just look at it'll just run the migration backwards. Where it'll say, oh, you ran a remove column, right? I'm going to run an add column, but since I didn't pass in an optional third string, it doesn't know what type it should be added back, so it errored. But since I added back email, if I run rake db rollback, now I should get my emails back on my dog. So dog.new, and now I have email right there. Any more questions? Yeah. I couldn't hear the last part.
So it's like, so you have a stock and
So you're saying if I have a dog, it has an email column, right? And I delete that column, does it still have access to it? No, it doesn't. It'll just take off that information.
Oh,
Yeah. So be very careful when deleting columns, because unless you have database backups, there's no going back. Okay. Yes.
If I want to dump data so I can send to people with does we provide any feedback for that?
For dumping the data,
And,
for that, I don't think so. It has ways that you could provide seeding data, but if you have production data, what you have to do is you probably have to have data, like more database knowledge, and just like, for example, if you run like a Postgres database on production, you just have to know how to like SSH into it and then just have it dumped to your like local machine. That's a lot more involved, or at least I don't know how to do it through Rails, and I would have to do it through that way. Can't guarantee there's no way. Okay. I believe that is pretty much the minimum amount of information you need to complete your homework, except there's an extra part that's kind of cool, but that I didn't show in this lecture, but I just want to go through it just as a sake of reminding us what we learned last week. So, question. I want to create a static page, right? And link it to, and make it my home page. Can anyone just give me a place where to start? Just any place. Routes.rb. Okay, that's a good place to start. So in my routes.rb, I will, okay, instead of doing the search, I will show you that just for the sake of reminders that routes.rb is in my config file. Okay, I have all this extra string that I don't want. And to get something to be my home page, all I have to do is type root, the name of my controller, static_pages, and the action on the controller. This is all from last week. And you probably did it if you finished the homework. But if you do root static_pages at home, I will know when I go to my root URL, I'll go to my static pages home method. So if I start my Rails server, whoops, Rails S, that's my Rails server. And I pop open localhost 3000. Rails will stop me because I have migrations that I have not ran yet. Just so that your app stays consistent, it'll make sure that you run your migrations. So I will, in another terminal, I'll just run rake db migrate. And I'll run the migration I rolled back from earlier. So now the dogs no longer have emails. I refresh, and now here's another problem. Uninitialized constant static pages controller. What that means is I've created a route, right? I told it to go to the static pages controller's home method, but I've never created the static pages controller. So what I could do is Rails G for generate controller. What kind of controller is it? Okay, I'm just gonna start typing it then. Static pages, which is the name of the controller, static pages, and optionally you could hand it methods for it to be defined automatically. So I hand in home. So important part is I get the app controllers static_pages_controller made for me. And in it, if I go to app controllers static pages controller, it defines home for me. And in the views, it'll create a folder called static_pages and create a view called home.html.erb. So another thing you should note, it creates a route for you, but I'm going to delete that route because I want it to be the home page. So I'm going to refresh, and bam. So what happens is that my router will match my home a request to the root to my static pages controller. It goes to the home method. The home method does not run any actions, right? But it makes the assumption that I have a view called home.html.erb. This is all information from last week, just as a reminder. And in my home.html.erb, right here, under my views and static pages, it just has this, find me, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to delete some stuff and just put the header dogs. Okay, and I refresh, now I just have the header dogs. Okay, so this is like, at this point, I'm just going over information that we'll re-go over next week. But it's just like a fun part on your homework if you want to do it, is that we have this page, dogs. We have our static pages controller. And let's say, so in my controller, I have access to the models. How do I get, does anyone remember how I get all my dogs? Yeah, dog.all. So I have dog.all. I call this method, right? I want to store it in a variable that my view can access. How do I do that? So right now, I heard d equals dog.all. And yes, that stores dog.all into the variable d, but my view can't access it just yet. What was the special type of variable that the views can access? Yes, the instance variable, which is an @sign. So I'm going to say @d equals dog.all. And just to have a better name, I'm just going to put @dogs just to make it more clear. And in here, I'm going to put embedded Ruby. Okay. And to do embedded Ruby, if you remember, it's just a tag with parentheses. And to make it show up on the page, I'll just do an equal sign and put dogs here. So what I'll do is I'll evaluate dogs and put it in my HTML. Oh. It prints out the evaluation of dog.all. Dog.all actually is just a query for all the dogs. It's not the individual dogs itself. So how do I want to access the individual dogs? Is, if you remember from the first lecture about Ruby, I want to iterate over. To iterate over an array, I have to call .each do and pass, and then just say what variable each element is going to be called within my procedure. Okay, and I'm going to just end this loop right here. And finally, I'm going to write the procedure that I want in the middle. What I'm going to do is do $sign equals dog.name. Wait, let me check something really quickly. A very useful piece of information is that I told you migrations are deltas, right? And basically to add up the migrations, to add up all the pluses and minuses of adding tables, columns, removing them, you get a final form. To look at what the final form of what your table is, there's a file in your DB folder. So I'm going to close app and go to DB called schema.rb. This file is the final form of your database. So this is actually very useful information that I forgot to mention. That all your migrations, add plus, will end up to be your schema.rb. So what's useful is that instead of running through all the migrations to create a database, you could just hand someone your schema.rb and they could just jump to that form of the database right there. That is useful. So basically, my dog has something called username, right? So in my view, home.html, I got dog.name, or sorry, it should be dog.username. And I'm going to take out the equal sign right here. Does anyone know why? Exactly. I don't need to print out this control flow. The only thing I want to print out is my dog's username. And I'm just going to surround it with p tags. I actually know very little about HTML, but hopefully this will be slightly styled more, sort of. So when I refresh the page, now I have my 2 dogs printed, each on their own paragraph tag. And both my dogs happen to be named Ethan. If I pop on my console, one last time, I could just do real.console, dog, I said d equals dog.last, d dot user name equals hi, d dot save. And I actually have an extra dog down here. It just didn't have a username before, so nothing showed up. But if I refresh, I get my 3rd dog, hi. And if I want to update information about my 1st dog, I could store dog.first, d.username, just as my name, Howard, and d.save to actually commit the change. And once my change commits, I have right now an HTML page that will make an access to my database and change based off the information of it. This was not originally planned for, I guess, for me to present this lecture. So if all the things I did within the last 15 minutes just went over your head, that's fine, because it was part of the core topic of next lecture. But if we have any questions, what are they? All right, so yeah, just to reiterate, we've actually finally got into a point where, like, even though I called this a static pages controller, this page isn't static at all. It actually changes based off of the information in my database. So we're one step closer to making a really awesome app. Okay, that's the content of today's lecture. I'll release the check-in code really soon. And also, if you, from last week, Warren, one of the TAs told me he would do an optional HTML lectures after class if people who wanted to stay are interested. Unfortunately, he can't do it this week because he has a 170 midterm, so yeah. Yeah, so just sit tight.